Welcome to this session on the selection and building toolbars. I'm Amy Worrell, lead architect on Lexical iOS, and I'm excited to tell you about all the ways Lexical can make it easy for you to build toolbars for your rich text editing experiences. To start, I'll talk about how Lexical thinks about the selection. Then I'll guide you through some APIs to manipulate the contents of the selection, and to apply paragraph and character level styling. Finally, we'll talk about how you can customize the selection experience for your own nodes. It's time to review some fundamentals. The lexical editor state contains two things: a tree of nodes and a selection. Lexical provides a couple of different kinds of selection, such as range selection or node selection, and they all conform to the base selection protocol. Let's talk about range selection first. This is the selection type that you will use most often, as it's a good match for how TextKit thinks about selection. A range selection contains an anchor and a focus. These represent the two ends of the selected text. They can be either way round. The focus is at the end of the selection that will be modified if you press Shift and arrow keys, for example. A range selection can also represent the position of the caret. In this case, the anchor and the focus will be the same. The anchor and focus are both instances of the point type. There are two kinds of point: element or text. Each point contains a node key and an offset value. The meaning of the offset value is different depending on whether it is an element or a text point. For element points, the offset value places the point between the element's children, like so. Whereas for text points, the offset value places the point within the node's text content at a certain character offset. As always with Lexical, this offset is in UTF-16 code points, which is the same as what TextKit 1 and the NSString APIs use internally. Lexical keeps the selection in sync between the editor state and the UI text view. When the user changes selection in the text view, Lexical fetches the native selection from the text view and matches up the locations to Lexical nodes. If the selection is changed using Lexical APIs, then as part of the reconciler process, we apply the selection back to the text view. This was range selection. I'll talk more about other selection types such as node selection towards the end of this presentation. Now let's talk about how your code can work with the selection. To programmatically interact with a selection, first we need to fetch or create one. The API getSelection will fetch the current selection. The returned objects can then be modified if you're inside an update block, and Lexical will handle mapping your changes onto the text view once your update is finished. MakeRangeSelection is a convenience function which will make and install a new range selection with the values you specify. Both element node and text node define a select method, which will create or modify the selection to select just the target node. Finally, it is totally okay to create your own selection object, maybe by instantiating one directly, and then set editorState.selection. Make sure you mark your selection as dirty, so that Lexical knows it has to reconcile it. When you have a selection object, what can you do with it? You can get access to the Lexical nodes that make up the selection by calling extract or getNodes. Extract will split nodes if they are partially inside the selection, thus the returned nodes exactly corresponds to the selection. But because it causes a modification to the editor state, it can only be done inside an updates block. Conversely, getNodes will not modify the editor state, but it will return nodes that may be entirely or partially inside the selection. As well as getting access to the nodes that are inside the selection, you can outright replace them. You can call insertNodes to replace the contents of the selection with new nodes. Or you can call insertRawText or insertText to replace the selection with some plain text. Insert text has a few more smarts and heuristics than insert raw text, which in general are meant to apply correct behaviour when handling user-provided input. Now let's talk about the sorts of things you'll do when building a toolbar. We need to do two main things. When the user interacts with the toolbar, such as pressing the bold button, we need to update our data model to apply the required formatting. We also need to observe any changes in the data model so that we can correctly update the state of the toolbar. For example, changing whether the bold button is selected when the user moves the selection into or out of the bold region. Before we dive into how to write the toolbar code, I should point out that we have an example of a toolbar as part of the playground in the toolbar plugin.swift file. This toolbar is an example of what is possible, and you're welcome to use it as a starting point when designing your own. Let's talk about the button actions then. We'll start with how to apply character styles. As you know, many of the things you can do in Lexical are accessed through commands. In this case, there is a format text command. Here's how you use it to apply bold. For more details on what is going on here, we can dive into the Lexical internals. The command is registered inside register rich text, along with a lot of other commands. If we follow through the function calls, we reach update text format. As we can see, this function simply gets the current selection as a range selection and calls format text on it. So all the work is being done in range selection's format text method. There's a lot of logic in here, which you don't need to worry about if you're just using the standard formats built into text node. Format text is even smart enough to handle the case where the user sets a format when nothing is selected. For example, pressing the bold button on the toolbar before they start typing. In this case, the user would expect the text that they subsequently typed to be bold. And indeed, format text handles this for us. Let's move on to talking about custom character styles. The web version of Lexical has two ways to accomplish these. But sadly, one of them is not available on Lexical iOS yet. The one that's not yet available is the style property on text node. On the web, you can place arbitrary CSS in there, adding whatever formatting you want. At this current moment in time, then, your main way to apply custom character styling in Lexical iOS is to build your own subclass of text node. If you want more information on how to build custom nodes, see the session Building Custom Nodes. For now, I'll talk about what you'll need to do in order to use these nodes in response to a toolbar button. Here we have a purple text node, and we're going to apply it to the selection. First, use the extract method to obtain just the nodes within the selection. We're going to check whether the first relevant node is already a purple text node, so that we can know if we're applying or removing our style. Then we iterate recursively through all the nodes we've obtained, and if one is a text node, we're going to replace it with our purple text node. Now, when I tap on the relevant toolbar button, it toggles whether my text is purple. Once again, let me reiterate that in the future, an easier system for custom styling will be coming to Lexical iOS. Next up, let's apply a paragraph style. In Lexical, paragraph styles tend to be implemented as element node subclasses. There's a few already present in Lexical core, such as paragraph node, heading node, or quote node, and you can make your own. To apply one, again, we're going to start by getting the selection. This time, there's a really handy helper function called setBlocksType. We pass in the selection and a closure to create the relevant element node subclass that we want to wrap things in. setBlocksType will remove the top-level non-inline element node or nodes and wrap their children in the newly created one instead. Finally, when creating a toolbar, we'll need a way of updating the state of the toolbar in response to changes in Lexical. For instance, if the user moves the caret into a bulleted list item, we probably want the paragraph style toolbar button to change to show that the currently selected paragraph is a bulleted list. For this, we'll use an update listener. Let's handle working out the current paragraph style first. We get our selection, and assuming that it's a range selection, we look at the anchor. There's a helpful method called getTopLevelElement. This will find us the ancestor element node that is directly underneath the root node. With this, we can work out which paragraph style is active by looking at the type of object we have. For something like heading node, which has multiple different levels of heading, we may wish to compare additional properties on that node too. For the built-in character styles, we can use the hasFormat method directly on the selection. If we wanted to detect our custom character styles that are implemented as custom nodes, we would call getNodes on the selection and inspect the returned values. Now that we've seen how to make a toolbar, let's move back to talking about selections. As well as range selection, we also have node selection. Node selection stores a set of nodes which are selected. It is often used for decorator nodes if they want to implement custom selection behaviour. For example, in our Lexical Playground app, we can insert an embedded image and then select it by tapping on it. In this situation, we are using a node selection to keep track of the node which is selected. The logic for handling the tap and drawing the border when selected are handled in this case by the reusable selectable decorator node class, which handles reacting to and modifying the current node selection. The API for node selection is really simple. The functions add and delete handle adding and removing nodes from the selection. In addition, it responds to all the APIs from basic selection, although some of the code is a work in progress. If you want to programmatically set the current selection to a node selection, simply create your node selection and assign it to the active editor state's selection property. The reconciler will do the rest, including having the text view resign first responder. Behind the scenes, Lexical sets up another hidden responder to handle keyboard inputs whenever the current selection is not a range selection. So, what did we learn? We learnt what a lexical selection is and how to modify it programmatically. We learned how to find the nodes that are within a selection and how the extract method can automatically split them at the selection boundary. We also learned how to replace the nodes within the selection with other nodes or with plain text. For toolbars, we learned how to dispatch commands to apply the built-in character styles. A custom text node subclass can provide your own custom character styles, until the upcoming style API changes are ready. Paragraph styles are simply element node wrappers, and we learnt some APIs to find and change them. Updating a toolbar can be done with an update listener. Finally, we learned how node selection is often used by decorator nodes that want custom selection behaviour. I hope this session was useful to you, and I can't wait to see the text editing experiences that you create.